You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Hello and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Gray Bashew. Born in South Africa, Gray was beatboxing before he could speak. He cultivated his musical mind in a creative environment with his children's television writer/director parents. Gray soon developed a deep fascination with recording music as well as a passion for filmmaking. After graduating from Berklee College of Music, he decided to merge his two loves and explore a career in film scoring. Gray has since created original music for brands such as Nike, Disney, Peace Corps, Monster Energy Drinks, DC Shoe Company, and a variety of others. His most notable work is the nostalgic throwback music he contributed to Comedy Central's Drunk History. In addition to composing, Gray loves collaborating with other creatives as a music producer, songwriter, drummer, video producer, director, and didgeridooer. When not working on music or films, Gray can usually be found hiking in the mountains around LA with his dog, Reginald Von Berkshire. Got me there. Former Secret Sonics guest Ian Dotson recommended I reach out to Gray, who has graciously agreed to join me on the show from France, of all places. So welcome to Secret Sonics, Gray.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
For sure, dude. So tell us a bit about how you got started getting involved in music production. And before we jumped on the actual conversation, you mentioned you can trace your entire history of production back to one project in ninth grade Spanish. So just tell us about that, man.
Yeah, well, like you said in my bio, which was so funny to hear someone like say that out loud.
Right, totally.
I grew up with some creative parents, so music was always kind of like a thing in the house. And like ever since I was really, really young, I always, said I wanted to grow up and be a musician. So that's always kind of been the thing. And then that thing where I mentioned I can trace my whole career back to ninth grade Spanish is just, I don't know, I love to do that where I sort of find myself in a situation and I trace back like, oh, I'm here because of that decision and I'm here because I met that person and I met that person because of this person. I'm always doing that. And so I did that and I realized that this one connection that I made in that Spanish class when I did a video project with one of my fellow students, we ended up like starting a band together. And then through that, I met all these other musicians and was introduced to Berklee and like decided to go off and do that. And then that turned into sort of the jump off for the rest of my career. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the story of how I got into music production. I mean, I just love music, I just want to make great music and hang out with cool musicians. They're the coolest people.
That's amazing. When you were in Berklee, did you study music production or were you still like studying the craft of like, I guess, just playing?
So all the students have to have a primary instrument and then you can choose a major after a few semesters. So I originally got in as a vocalist, but I didn't dig the voice department so much on my first semester. And I'm a multi-instrumentalist, but I was most confident singing and sight singing. But I decided to re-audition on drums and got into the drum program and ended up loving the drum program. And then after a couple semesters, I had to actually apply to get into the music production and engineering major because it's their most competitive major, and the studios at that time were still pretty small and they didn't have a lot of space to have like big classes. So I got into that major, and then for I think like most of my time at Berklee, I was doing production stuff, but you really focus on like producing other people's music. Like I think it's only in the last semester that they finally allow you to produce your own music, which was kind of tough for me because I don't know, my whole life I've been like self-producing, and then to like come to school and they're like, oh, you're not allowed to do that. Like all of your projects have to be producing a band or an artist at Berklee. But actually, looking back on it, it's a really good thing because it kind of brought me out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And like really teaches you how to like record people besides yourself, right? Like,
yeah, and just communicating and like sort of understanding the roles in like a traditional recording session. Like I don't know, so much of the way that I was brought up, just like, the kid with the computer and kind of taking on all the roles and wearing all the different hats just to get a piece of music done. And then like going to school, they were really like, oh, well, when you're in the studio, traditionally there's the artist and the producer and the engineer and the assistant engineer. And then, kind of understanding those roles and like wrapping my head around it in a way where I was able to work as a team. Whereas before that, I didn't really get the roles and just kind of wanted to control everything.
So is that like your main takeaway, was like letting go?
I don't know. I guess for me, it's been something that I've worked on a lot, and I feel like has been a really beneficial thing to kind of like focus on and like put the time in terms of like making collaboration a priority and making that really important. Because I can definitely see the benefit in the music, and also can just see, there's countless benefits. Like there's a couple of pros to like working alone, but the pros to working collaboratively is just like greatly outweigh working alone. And I mean, like as most of the work that I do professionally is like composing. Like, commercials, film, TV, that kind of stuff. And like so much of that has to be done alone because the budgets are small, and like so much of the work can be done in MIDI and like can be done by one person in a studio. So it's important for me, like when I can, to collaborate as much as possible, because I don't know. Yeah. Especially just in terms of the way the music sounds when it's all said and done, like having multiple brains on that music is always a good thing.
Yeah. It's almost always like, what's the word? I'm blanking on it, but it's greater than the sum of its parts when you have like multiple people,
Yeah. And for me, it's more exciting when I'm contributing to something that other people are passionate about, that they've put hard work into. Like, I don't know. I just think I get a kick out of that. Like when I get like a commercial or like a short film or something sent to me, and I'm like, oh, there's already like, 30 people that put a bunch of work into this, and it looks amazing. And now I get to put like the cherry on top. For me, I get a kick out of that.
Wow, that is awesome. Left field question, but are you the oldest child?
No, the youngest.
Youngest. Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm the oldest child, and I feel like maybe that's like part of my like, I have this like tendency to like control and try to do all the things and wear all the hats, and kind of like, I'm just like curious where that comes from. And like, I guess I majored in psychology in college, but I don't really think about that stuff too much, to be honest. But
yeah, anyways. I think both of my parents were directors. So growing up, just like the way that they would comment on things, like we would watch movies or go to art galleries or listen to some music or whatever it was, like, I don't know, I felt like I sort of developed my figuring out like what I like and what I don't like pretty early.
Yeah, your taste.
Yeah, my taste, like pretty early. And I've always, earlier in my career, I was way more vocal about things. Like I just had a million ideas and wanted to try them all and wanted to tell everyone all my ideas because I thought they were so great. And just like I said, that was one of the things I had to work on, was just sort of deciding when it's really important to talk.
Yeah. I think that's important as a producer, is to like when to let the artist kind of like have a voice, and when to step up and tell the artist like the song will hurt if you go this direction, like we need to go this direction, kind of thing, Exactly.
And exactly like you just said, like the song will hurt, because that for me was the greatest discovery in terms of like things I learned when I started collaborating, was just like the best way to communicate and the best way to think about it and the best perspective to have is like serving the music,
Yeah, absolutely.
Like everything is in service of the music. The music has a voice, and you have to listen to it and figure out what it's asking for and what it needs. And everyone can be in service of the music. And when everyone's coming from that angle, then there's just less ego and people aren't there in service of themselves,
Yes, you preach. You said it, man. So tell me about scoring music for film. Like, where does the process begin for you? How does that work?
Oh man, it's like, it begins with a blank canvas. I mean, usually it begins with reference music. But even with reference music, there's a moment where you have to stare at a blank canvas. But ideally, the blank canvas is a beautiful thing. But yeah, no, it begins with meeting filmmakers and, you know, letting them understand what you're about musically and forming relationships and friendships. And then when they send you visual stuff to work on, I don't know, it's just I feel like honored as a musician to be trusted with this stuff that they've put so much hard work into, because really they can't really direct when I'm working on the music. So they really have to trust me. And I understand that because like I also direct, and I've done projects where I've worked with composers, and I understand what it's like to hand that video off and just like trust that person. But yeah,
it's like dropping your kids off at daycare or something, you know, like.
And that's actually a really good analogy, because sometimes people are so precious over these things that it's like their baby. But other times they're really cool about it. Every director is totally different and has a different approach. But most directors give me a reference. They'll give me like another commercial to watch, or they'll put a piece of music in the cut that they like, or they'll just like tell me an artist or a vibe or some film score that they're into that they want me to kind of not copy, but create something in the same palette, you know?
Yeah.
In sort of the same sonic palette, so that it evokes similar emotions. And that's something that I definitely struggled with at the beginning, where I was like all about originality and everything, and just like felt like I don't want to just like copy this Coldplay song 9 different ways. But it's something that I've come to terms with, and actually realize now, looking back on it, that the times that I learned the most was when I got a reference that I was just like, whoa, I'm not going to be able to do that. And then, you know,
you deconstruct 2 days
and
later, figure out what goes into it.
2 days later, I'm like listening to the thing I made, and I'm like, whoa, like I actually really learned a lot about composing just by having to deconstruct that thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's been really cool. I mean, I've done, you name a genre, you name a time period, like I've done some demo or some piece in that genre.
That's wild.
So it's really cool in that, like, after doing that for like 10 years now, I feel like I can kind of sit down and like play me a piece of music, and I can start making something that is similar to that, which is really liberating, you know? It's like, but also kind of weird in that, like, sometimes when you have limitations, it's easier to be creative. So when I do go back to the passion projects and stuff, sometimes I really have to come at it with a limited approach and be like, I'm going to use this kind of palette and stay in this kind of genre of music, even though the inner composer in me wants to like bring in all these instruments and do all this cool, dramatic, fancy stuff, but it isn't really.
Yeah, limitations really allow you to be creative. When you have endless opportunities, you just like delay so many choices, and you don't commit to stuff, and then things don't really go anywhere. But like, I don't know, like the Beatles had 4 channels and they made it work.
Yeah.
That limitation is what it's about.
Yeah, and I mean, composing does exactly that, because you have to stay in the limitation of serving the video and telling the story, and you know, doing the characters justice and doing the cinematography justice. And like, there are all these things that you have to take into account and like serve. It's like when you're just producing music, you're kind of like serving the music, and sometimes you're serving your audience a little bit, and the artist's ego, depending on who you're working with. But yeah, when you're composing, there are like so many different things, but it's mostly about sort of staying true to the tone and the story and whatever the point of the video is.
This is kind of a weird question, but like, what's the first thing you do when you get like, do you like just watch it without any music in the background? You just like watch the scene, or do you listen with the reference, or do you just like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I like to first import the reference into my session and listen to that. If there's multiple references, I'll get them all in there. And then, you know, I'll watch it with the picture. I'll see what's working about it. I'll see if the director has created some kind of sync points with the music, you know, parts where the video and the edit, where things happen in alignment with the rhythm of the music. Because usually directors are pretty, like, if they've done that in the edit with the reference music, they're usually pretty in love with it. So it's your job as a composer to, you know, recognize the things that they've done and imitate them when it's your time to compose. But yeah, sometimes I'll even go on a research mission, and find my own